Thousands of broad-gauge locomotives worth 15 to 25 crore rupees each sit motionless in diesel sheds scattered across India, their paint fading under relentless sun, their engines silent. Worldwide demand for railway equipment surges, yet Indian Railways reports over 1,200 diesel locomotives in condemned status. Fewer than 50 find buyers each year. The rest remain, locked behind chain-link fences in places like Tughlakabad, Andal, and Jajjar, seemingly abandoned by the very organization that spent fortunes to acquire them. Why would a cash-strapped railway prefer letting these machines rust over selling them to willing buyers? The answer is not what you think, and the numbers tell a story that resets everything about railway economics. A 20 crore rupee WDG4 locomotive begins losing value the moment it enters service. Indian Railways follows the written down value method under Section 32 of the Income Tax Act, applying a 15% depreciation rate for diesel locomotives and 10% for electric units. The Companies Act 2013 sets useful life at 15 to 20 years under Schedule 2, but the financial erosion happens much faster. In year 1, 3 crore rupees vanish from the books. By year 5, the original value has dropped by more than half. After 15 years of hauling freight across the Gangetic plain, that same locomotive carries a book value of just 3 to 4 crore rupees, sometimes less. This is where the mathematics becomes fascinating. When Indian Railways officially retires the locomotive, recording it as condemned and removing it from active inventory, the remaining book value transforms into a capital loss under Section 32. That loss offsets taxable income directly, creating a tax shield worth 90 lakh to 1.35 crore rupees at the effective corporate tax rate of 30%. There is no need to find a buyer, no paperwork beyond internal accounting entries, and no risk of triggering additional scrutiny. The Railway Board simply records the asset as retired, and the loss flows through the financial statements, reducing tax liability and improving the operating ratio that governs performance metrics and budget allocations. Selling the locomotive flips the entire equation and not in a favorable direction. Any proceeds above the adjusted book value trigger capital gains tax under Section 50, with gains taxed as ordinary income. The railway pays full corporate tax on the difference, shrinking net returns to almost nothing. But tax implications pale beside a more immediate calculation that unfolds daily inside India's 41 diesel sheds and 58 electric locomotive workshops. These condemned machines are not idle. They are gold mines of spare parts that keep the active fleet running when original equipment manufacturers demand 6 to 12 months for replacement deliveries. A single WDG4 yields 8 traction motors worth 8 to 12 lakh rupees each, totaling 64 to 96 lakh rupees in components that would otherwise require foreign procurement. Air compressors fetch 15 to 18 lakh rupees. Diesel engine power assemblies command 45 to 60 lakh rupees. Control electronics and microprocessor systems, even outdated ones, are valued at 25 to 35 lakh rupees because they are exact replacements for units still in service. Bogies and suspension systems add another 20 to 30 lakh rupees per set. Internal accounting at major diesel sheds shows total recoverable value between 2.8 and 3.5 crore rupees per condemned locomotive, exceeding any realistic sale price by comfortable margins. The strategic logic extends beyond immediate parts value. When a Rajdhani locomotive fails during monsoon season, maintenance superintendents need replacement traction motors within 4 hours, not 4 months. Waiting for Alstom in France or EMD in the United States is not an option when passenger trains stack up at platforms and freight schedules collapse. Condemned locomotives function as strategic reserves against vendor delays, supply chain disruptions, and the persistent challenges of Make in India programs that still depend on imported critical components for propulsion and control systems. There is another consideration that railway planners discuss quietly in boardrooms. Every locomotive sold to private operators like Adani, JSW, or Tata Steel's captive railways potentially creates future competition in the freight sector, where Indian Railways already faces market share erosion. Keeping condemned locomotives off the market prevents capability transfer to industrial railways that might undercut rates or capture lucrative contracts. The math favors internal cannibalization over any conceivable sale, but these calculations assume the railway can legally dispose of or sell the equipment in the first place. Indian environmental regulations create barriers that transform selling from merely unprofitable into practically impossible. The Ministry of Environment and Forest mandates Bharat stage emission standards for all operating locomotives, requiring BS4 equivalent compliance by 2023. Any locomotive built before 2010 cannot meet these thresholds without retrofits costing 4 to 6 crore rupees per unit, far exceeding the machine's residual value. The Central Pollution Control Board demands certification under the Environment Protection Act of 1986, requiring emissions testing that pre-2010 diesel locomotives consistently fail. Recertification is theoretically possible, but financially absurd when the entire locomotive is worth less than the compliance paperwork. The toxic materials embedded in every locomotive create even steeper obstacles. Polychlorinated biphenyls in transformers, banned since 2003 but present in older units, require specialized removal costing 35 to 45 lakh rupees. Asbestos, insulation in brake systems and cabin walls, adds 18 to 28 lakh rupees in abatement costs under the asbestos regulation of 1986. Lead-acid batteries demand 8 to 12 lakh rupees for proper disposal under battery management rules. 2022, 4,000 to 6,000 liters of diesel fuel and lubricants need draining and disposal at 12 to 18 lakh rupees. Heavy metals in electrical components require 15 to 22 lakh rupees in decontamination. The Hazardous and Other Wastes Management and Transboundary Movement Rules of 2016 make railways liable for every drop of leaked oil and every flake of contaminated paint, establishing extended producer responsibility that survives any sale or transfer. Exporting condemned locomotives introduces another layer of regulatory complexity through the Director General of Foreign Trade. Export licensing requirements demand inducer verification for railway equipment, with some locomotive electronics falling under the SCOMET list of items with potential defense applications. Strategic trade authorization procedures add 90 to 180 days to any international transaction. The 2019 proposed sale to Bangladesh Railways collapsed over software support guarantees and export documentation disputes, leaving both parties frustrated and Indian Railways holding unsaleable assets. Even domestic sales trigger continuing liability under Section 123 of the Indian Railways Act of 1989, which holds the railway responsible for equipment safety long after ownership transfers. Recent court cases have established precedent for holding railways liable for accidents involving locomotives sold or scrapped years earlier, creating insurance complications and demanding indemnity bonds that few buyers will accept. A Railway Board environmental compliance officer puts it plainly: certifying a 25-year-old locomotive costs more than it would fetch at auction. We are not abandoning them by choice. We are trapped by regulations we helped create. Yet even if railways could navigate this regulatory maze, the secondary market has collapsed so completely that selling has become mathematically impossible regardless of legal clearances. Metal Scrap Trade Corporation auction data from 2018 to 2024 tells a grim story. WDM, 2 locomotives that sold for 2.8 crore rupees in 2018 now fetch 60 to 80 lakh rupees at hammer price when they sell at all. The paradox is striking. Scrap metal value alone reaches 4 to 6 crore rupees per locomotive, calculated at 120 tons multiplied by 35,000 rupees per ton average. A working locomotive now sells for less than its weight in scrap steel, a market inversion that defies basic economics but reflects brutal oversupply. Indian Railways' accelerated electrification program has transformed the landscape with devastating speed. 38,000 route kilometers have been electrified since 2014, rendering diesel fleets increasingly obsolete. The diesel locomotive count has plummeted from 6,000 units in 2014 to 4,200 in 2024, with projections showing 2,500 by 2030. 400 to 600 locomotives reach condemned status annually, but the market absorbs only 30 to 50. Diesel sheds in Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, and Odisha overflow with obsolete WDM2 and WDM3 class machines that nobody wants and nobody can afford to properly dispose of. Technology obsolescence accelerates the collapse. Locomotives built in the 1990s and 2000s contain proprietary microprocessor control systems locked to specific hardware by EMD, Alstom, and Siemens. These manufacturers define support life cycles, typically ending after 15 years. EMD stopped supporting WDM2 electronics in 2015, leaving thousands of units effectively unrepairable once control modules fail. A private railway operator describes the nightmare with bitter clarity. We bought 3 locomotives at auction. 2 became parts donors for the third. Even then, we are running on borrowed time until the next electronic failure. No software updates, no technical support, no replacement boards. When it dies, it stays dead. Industrial railways that might have purchased these machines a decade ago now prefer leasing new locomotives from private operators rather than gambling on unsupported technology. Export buyers in Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and African nations demand warranties that Indian Railways cannot provide without manufacturer backing that no longer exists. A proposed 2021 sale to Myanmar Railways collapsed when Indian Railways could not guarantee software support for control systems. The preparation costs make every sale a guaranteed loss. Certification, overhaul, and legal clearances cost 1.2 to 1.8 crore rupees per locomotive. Average auction realization hovers between 70 lakh and 1.1 crore rupees. The net loss ranges from 40 lakh to 1.1 crore rupees per unit sold. Contrast that with abandonment, which generates a tax shield worth 75 lakh to 1.2 crore rupees. The economics alone explain the preference for abandonment, but beneath every condemned locomotive lies an environmental time bomb that transforms abandonment from financial choice into absolute necessity. 20 to 30 years of service leaves deep contamination. Soil beneath diesel sheds at Tughlakabad, Kanpur, and Jhajjar shows fuel and oil saturation from decades of leaks. The National Green Tribunal imposed a 15 crore rupee penalty in the 2018 Kanpur diesel shed case, establishing precedent that railways face joint and several liability under the polluter pays principal even after selling equipment. The Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act of 1974, the Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act of 1981, and the National Green Tribunal Act of 2010 create overlapping liability frameworks that survive any ownership transfer. Proper disposal costs are staggering. PCB transformer removal requires CPCB authorized facilities at 35 to 45 lakh rupees per locomotive. Asbestos abatement demands specialized contractors at 18 to 28 lakh rupees. Fuel and lubricant disposal runs 12 to 18 lakh rupees for 4,000 to 6,000 liters per unit. Lead-acid battery disposal adds 8 to 12 lakh rupees under 2022 regulations. Heavy metal decontamination costs 15 to 22 lakh rupees. Soil remediation at storage sites reaches 25 to 40 lakh rupees. Total proper disposal, 1.13 to 1.65 crore rupees per locomotive, before accounting for unlimited liability exposure if contamination spreads. Unauthorized scrappers in Mughalsarai, Rourkela, and Secunderabad offer 5 to 6 crore rupees per locomotive with rapid turnaround and no environmental questions asked. Authorized MSTC scrapping follows proper protocols but takes 18 to 24 months and costs more than the scrap value recovered. The 2019 Patna diesel shed contamination triggered an 8 crore rupee cleanup order from CPB. The 2022 Jhajjar Scrap Facility NGT action held Indian Railways liable despite having sold the locomotives years earlier, proving that sales multiply exposure across multiple contaminated sites rather than limiting it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment below and give this video a like if you enjoyed it. See you on the next one.